We're going to kick things off. Jason, if you could go to the flyer slide, that'd be great. And I would like to introduce Councilman Price, and he's going to do our welcome this morning. So, Councilman Price.
Thank you, Shawn. Good morning. I'm Councilman Curren Price, representing the 9th Council District, or as we say, the new 9th. And welcome to today's webinar. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we want to introduce you to a strategy that's focused on retaining our long-standing businesses. Employee ownership is a business model that sustains high-quality jobs, keeps businesses rooted in local communities, and provides selling business owners with a fair price and a viable succession strategy. In my district, we found that 17% of the businesses representing 12,000 jobs are 20 years or older. As these business owners begin to transition into retirement, it's my hope that the business has a succession plan to help prevent those jobs from leaving. That's why I'm glad to partner with Project Equity in an effort to not just maintain long-term employment in South Los Angeles, but to create wealth for our community by deploying the strategy of employee ownership. My office is working with Project Equity to help with this. 1, providing outreach to business owners like you for awareness of employee ownership options. And 2, educate our internal staff and our local businesses on the language, the details, and process of making a transition to employee ownership. And 3, to work directly with interested business owners who want to learn more or engage in getting started with the transition process. Together, we can make an impact for businesses, employees, and our community. As a former business owner and chair of the Committee on Economic Development for the City Council, it's critical that we support our small business community citywide. And it's my hope that what you learned today, you'll be able to take advantage of programs that Project Equity has to offer. Lastly, let me just thank Shawn and Evan, the Project Equity staff, and my team, led by Mike Cedillo, for their insight and support of our small business community. To all, I say thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And again, we appreciate your partnership, and we're looking forward to doing a lot of great work together. So thank you again for your time. So that being said, I'll dive in and do an introduction of myself. My name is Shawn Randolph. I'm one of the business engagement and partnership managers at Project Equity. I've actually been out here in Los Angeles for the last 12 years. I'm originally East Coast native, but now have adopted Los Angeles as home. Interestingly enough, my first place that I landed when I arrived here in LA was on 55th and Long Beach Boulevard, which I believe is right within the bounds of CD9. So definitely have an affinity for this geographic area, and am looking forward to doing some great work here. That said, I'm also going to be the primary point of contact for all businesses, service providers, business connectors, stakeholders in this region, as well as in the surrounding region. So please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information will be at the end, and it's also on the screen now, but feel free to reach out to me after this webinar if you have any follow-up questions, warm introductions, so on and so forth. That being said, we'll dive straight into it, and thank you all again for being here. So a little bit more about Project Equity. Project Equity is a national nonprofit. We are headquartered in Oakland. We've seen a lot of rapid growth lately. Just a year and a half ago, I think we were a team of 7. Now we're a team of over 20 strong. And so we're seeing a large amount of growth, and that's in part due to partnerships like the one we have with Councilman Price's office and other cities and municipalities around the area. We've been, as an organization, we've been around just under 7 years now. And so we've been at this for quite a while. And, you know, as the slide indicates, we help business owners to secure their company's legacies by transitioning to employee ownership. This process provides business ownership to low, moderate income workforces, sustains high quality jobs, keeps businesses rooted in their local communities, and provides selling business owners with a fair price and a viable succession strategy. Next slide, please. So this is kind of our mission in short, but I'd like to expand on it just a little bit to really emphasize that at Project Equity, our work aims to deliver favorable outcomes to workforces and local economies. We believe that transitioning businesses to employee ownership, one, provides workers with economic benefits, greater security, and a voice in the workplace. Number two, it provides business owners with a market rate exit solution. And three, it keeps businesses and jobs rooted in the local economy. Obviously, we're all very much aware of, COVID right now and the impact that that has also had on our business community. So we also believe employee ownership is uniquely positioned in order to address business resiliency issues and can definitely be an asset to a lot of businesses moving forward. Next slide, please. So the businesses that we typically work with are small, medium, and large manufacturing, transportation, solar, logistics businesses, as well as community businesses such as florists, restaurants, contractors. That being said, there's not too many businesses that we cannot work with. Not every business is a fit for employee ownership, but a good chunk of them are definitely can use it as a viable option. Specifically as it relates to Council District 9, we know that there is a significant manufacturing focus, and as you all see on the slide, manufacturing actually is one of the core industries that employee ownership is actually a great fit for. So due to that, we're definitely looking forward to engaging with a lot of the manufacturing business owners that may be on this webinar or may be within you all's networks. Next slide, please. So to do a little bit of a deeper dive on the types of businesses that we focus on, I mentioned some of the industries previously, but to share a little bit more about that, target companies who are on the top prospect list for us based on size and industry typically are companies with around $5 million in revenue that typically have baby boomer owners, so owners that are at or nearing retirement age, have strong company values, have a strong connection to the community, and are within within industries that there is sale potential. So they're within industries that are attractive from a sales standpoint. Also, as far as building a referral network in our local community through relationships and educational efforts, we're also interested in engaging with finance professionals, trade associations, and different affinity groups as well. I know as I looked through the attendee list, I saw some CPAs, I saw some lawyers, I saw some marketing folks. You all are definitely people that we would love to engage with, as you all may have customers or prospective customers within these industries, and employee ownership can be, once again, a tool within the toolkit that you can present to them and put it on their radar, so to speak. Next slide, please. So questions that we would love all of you to keep in mind over the course of this presentation. One, how do I keep my business intact? How do I protect my workers? And how do I endure, how can I ensure that we come back from this? Obviously, many business owners right now, these are questions going through their minds. And all we ask is that as we go through this presentation and present the benefits of employee ownership, that you will match, how employee ownership can address many of these questions in a significant manner. Next slide, please. So to begin framing the problem, or at least the overview of the problem, is something called the Silver Tsunami. The Silver Tsunami is a phrase that many of you all may have heard before, but it essentially refers to the large quantity of baby boomer business owners that are at retirement age or nearing retirement age. These business owners, as we'll see on our next slide when we get there, represent a huge amount of value within the business community. But statistically speaking, research has shown that many of these business owners do not currently have succession plans in place. And as a result of those succession plans not being in place, there is a very high risk for a large amount of the value that they've built over the years with their businesses to evaporate. Because if the business has nowhere to go, in the event that the owner retires, or the owner's no longer able to lead the business, then it may end up dissolving or shutting down or moving forward in a much less efficient manner. And none of those options are things that are good for the community or the workforce. So the Silver Tsunami is kind of the overarching issue that we're looking to address. Next slide, please. So on top of having this Silver Tsunami issue, you add into that selling a business in general isn't easy. I'm sure a couple of you all business owners may or may not over the years have kind of tested the waters to see if you could find out what the value of your business currently is or could be down the line, and kind of get a sense of what kind of, return on investment, if you will, you could get. The statistics, kind of work against business owners, unfortunately. As you see from the slide, only around 20% of businesses sell, about 15% transition within families, and only about 1 in 5 businesses currently 1 in 5 businesses are at risk of closing. And so these are not, favorable statistics as you're going out there and trying to, get a good price for your business. If you also add in now the impact of COVID, there are many businesses who may have had a certain value at one point and, may have a significantly or at least slightly lesser value now. Then you add an additional layer, unfortunately, of the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on communities of color. The stats just kind of get tougher and tougher and tougher, which is why employee ownership is such a significant tool, in that it essentially opens the door to you engaging the employees who you've worked with, and built this business alongside, engaging them as a potential buyer in a way that empowers them and allows you to get a market rate return, is something that very few other resources can offer. Next slide, please. So putting some numbers to the Silver Tsunami, we're using all these phrases and terms, but to actually put some numbers to it, specifically as it relates to California, just under 300,000 businesses in this state are owned by baby boomers currently. This accounts for $642 billion of business revenue. Again, as I said before, that's imagine a number that size evaporating as these various business owners, don't have succession plans in place. The amount of workers that amount of revenue supports is significant. And you see right in the third stat, that's 2.9 million workers that are essentially employed by these just under 300,000 businesses. So not only do we want to make sure that these businesses stay in place, they stay rooted where they are, but we want to make sure that those 2.9 million workers have a even more gainful employment, that they have even more stability and even more empowerment. Next slide, please. So that said, we're going to intro right into employee ownership. No problem, Jason. Next slide. And we're going to dive right into what employee ownership is, the impact it has on businesses, on people, etc. And so before I dive right into these stats, I actually want to reference everybody to, in the fine print underneath these stats, you'll see Democracy at Work Institute, National Center for Employee Ownership. I just want to highlight those really quick to show that these stats are not in theory or projections or anything like that. These are numbers that have been drawn from years of data. Employee ownership, although it's something that hasn't necessarily been on a lot of people's radar, it has been around for quite a long time. So fortunately, there's a lot of statistics backing up the value that it brings. So specifically as it relates to businesses, 8.5% profit margins for businesses that are employee owned are 8.5% higher than its peers. The second stat, sales and employment rates grow 2% faster per year at employee ownership businesses versus the growth rates and sales rates at non-employee owned businesses. Next slide, please. Better wages. So not only does employee ownership help create stronger businesses, it creates better wages for the workers of those businesses. So as the slide says, several studies show that employee owners earn more, roughly $2 more an hour among cooperative employees, 53% higher incomes among ESOP employees, and 40 to 80% increases in family income and home cleaning co-ops. You'll also see the graph, and once again, I'll turn your attention to at the bottom, the stats are drawn from the National Center for Employee Ownership. So anybody who wants to check or learn more about some of these statistics, please feel free to do so, and we could also potentially provide some links. Next slide, please. So wealth building for all. This addresses, a topic that all of us are probably very familiar with, which is the growing wealth gap. This is something that still hasn't been addressed in the way that it needs to be. And the stats on this graph are meant to show how employee ownership has a direct impact on that. In the left side, the left indicator, you'll see the median wealth of single workers within various demographics. And then on the right side, you'll see the retirement accounts. So essentially the amount of wealth that's been accrued by those same demographics when they are employee owned or when they are working at employee owned entities. And so this is here essentially to highlight that there is a very significant amount of growth that takes place between the average amount of wealth that an individual at these various demographics have outside of employee ownership versus within employee ownership. And the overall point is employee ownership works, and it definitely directly addresses wealth building and addresses the racial wealth gap. Next slide, please. So a couple more stats related to employee ownership. 33% higher wages for workers at employee-owned entities, 53% longer job tenure, and 92% higher household net worth. Really quickly, I actually want to circle back to the middle stat, the 53% longer job tenure. Obviously, many of us now are seeing our maybe third or fourth economic crisis. We're seeing the economic crisis as it relates to COVID. Many of us were around and maybe had businesses or worked at businesses during the financial crisis back in 2007. Some of us more seasoned folks have been around and seen even more economic cycles. And I think it's very important, more so now than ever, that workers have that job security so that as the economy and as various unexpected factors, hit this nation, people are not constantly worried about whether or not they have a job to come back to the next day or the next month, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So further building on that point, once again, adding numbers to the storyline, fewer layoffs with employee-owned entities. And you all will see the statistic difference. The bars in the teal greenish represent employee-owned entities and the percentage of layoffs that they typically have over the years versus the gray bar, which is non-employee-owned entities. And all of this, again, I want to keep emphasizing, is rooted in statistics. Employee ownership works as it relates to building wealth. It works as it relates to job retention. It works as it relates to building community and business resiliency. Next slide, please. So community benefits. Obviously, there are individual benefits to employee ownership. There are business benefits to employee ownership. And then there are broader community benefits as well. Some of those benefits are 25% higher annual income, 9% more hours secured each week. So that's if you're talking about people who are maybe shift workers, they have an ability to get more hours a week, and then a higher wealth building potential. Next slide, please. Great, so really quick, we're actually gonna go through two quick examples of employee-owned entities. The first one is Recology. Recology is actually a San Francisco business that is 100% employee-owned, and you'll see at the bottom that they currently have 3,800 employee owners. I think one of the reasons that we highlight this particular business is that we want to show that employee ownership is scalable. It's not just something that works if you have 10 employees or 20 employees, but it's something that works all the way up into the thousands. And there are even some very large corporations that are employee owned as well. But to read through the specific testimonial for Recology, they shared that under our Recology Recovers policy, we still pay employees full salary during the shelter-in-place time period, even if we don't have enough work for everyone. And we continue their health benefits. We recognize that this is a unique time and we want to support our employee owners to the fullest extent possible. So obviously this highlights another reason we wanted to kind of focus on Recology, which is the resiliency that the business was able to build by being employee owned allowed them to not just retain their employees during shelter in place, but actually continue paying them full salaries despite the fact that work was not fully available for everybody. So that's not something that every business is equipped or structured to do. Employee ownership is a model that allows things like that to happen. Next slide, please. Delta Pipeline. Delta Pipeline is another example that we like to share, specifically because of its proximity. This business is in Long Beach. They are also 100% employee owned, and they have around 68 employee owners or team members. They transitioned back in 2017, and the testimony from their owner was that the ESOP, and ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. That is another form of employee ownership. The ESOP is about the people. The more you invest in people, the more likely you will succeed financially, spiritually, and socially. So we have many other examples, and I'd love to share them on the back end and share articles and such about some employee-owned entities that are actually right here in LA County and right near it, within the CD9 ecosystem, if you will, and happy to do that on the back end. Next slide, please. So how employee ownership works. So really quickly, if you're hearing all these stats and you're hearing these stories, and the next immediate question that is raised is, okay, so what does this look like for me? What does this look like for my business? What does this look like for the businesses that I interact with on a daily basis? Next, we're going to go through just exactly what the process of becoming an employee-owned entity looks like, and we're going to start with the financing, because obviously if there's not mechanisms to finance these transactions, then that kind of makes it a non-starter. So next slide, please. So how it works, and this specifically focuses on the financing. Next, we'll get into the actual process. But in short, Project Equity works with CDFIs to put together financing for employee ownership transitions. We partner with CDFIs specifically to avoid workers having to put up personal guarantees or collaterals. The lenders often include us because we are fortunate enough to actually have a fund of sorts where we contribute to these transactions. But the lenders finance 50 to 70% of the transaction, with the business owner doing seller financing for the rest typically. The business then pays off that debt from the going forward cash flows generated from the business now that it's employee owned. And so in short, wanting to first kind of lay the foundation, the financing for these transactions is done by organizations like Project Equity, partners of ours like LISC that we work very closely with CD9 and also throughout LA County and Long Beach. And then also sometimes traditional banks get involved as well. Next slide, please. So as it specifically relates to the process, so I covered how this gets financed, how the money works, how does the owner get their return, and how does the business transition to employee ownership from a financial standpoint. But from an actual process standpoint, this slide is very much a summary of how that gets done. So to walk through this, step one, which we call assessment, involves us engaging with the business and doing a financial feasibility. Financial feasibility essentially involves, we would engage with you as a business owner and multiple business owners. We would want to do a deep dive into the finances of your organization. We want to know how strong it is. What we would put together financial projections from 5 to 10 years out in order to get a better sense of the financial future of the organization. And all of this work is done. Oh, and also let me back up for a quick second. Another key part of that financial feasibility is doing a debt capacity analysis. And all that work is being done in order to ensure that the business on a foundational level is strong enough that it could service the debt that it would take to make this transaction happen. Because at the end of the day, we do not want to pull away from the business's growth prospects or put any amount of debt on the business that would hurt it in any way, shape, or form. So during that financial feasibility process, we're doing a very deep dive and making sure we understand the ins and outs of the business from a financial standpoint so we can put together the most mutually beneficial transaction possible. The next aspect of the assess process is employee interest. Obviously, we want to engage with the employees at your business to see what their level of interest in this is. Employee ownership is not anything that we want to force on anybody. Obviously, there are some clear benefits to being an employee owner versus just being an employee. But if there is not a core interest from the workforce in making that transition, then obviously that's something very important for us to know at the very beginning of the process. Thirdly, we assess leadership transition needs. In cases where you have an owner or several owners who are transitioning out of the business, oftentimes those owners wear multiple hats. Sometimes they have specific licenses or skill sets that are essential to that business being successful moving forward. So when we're doing our assessment process, we're making sure we know, okay, if this owner is going to be transitioning out over the next 6 months or 1 year or 3 years, do we have the capacity to bring in a replacement? Is there somebody currently at the business that can be trained up to fulfill that role and have all the licenses and things like that? So once again, the overall goal isn't just for us to get this transaction done, but to get it done in a way that is definitely beneficial for the future of the business. And so part of that involves assessing any gaps in management, leadership, and making sure those gaps are filled at some point during the transition process. Timeline and roadmap. Obviously, just putting together a timeline that makes sense for the owners. Some owners want to exit quicker than others. Other owners are more interested in staying involved and slowly but surely transitioning out of a business. We factor all that into our initial assessment of the business. So that covers our kind of first tranche of services that we do once an employee ownership transition or engagement is kicked off. The second step is the prepare portion. And so this involves actually taking the information, all the information we gathered from step one, and coming up with a series of plans and processes. The first plan being a leadership transition plan. Again, I mentioned this before. Is an owner exiting rapidly or is an owner exiting over time? We want to put plans in place so that does not take away from the value of the business in any way, shape, or form. The sales agreement and the financing. So this goes back to the previous slide where we're working with our CDFI partners, we're working with organizations like LISC, we're working with banks and making sure that we pull together the financing. And I think it's important to note that one of the benefits of Project Equity being a nonprofit, one of the benefits of organizations like LISC being a nonprofit and CDFIs and others is that we are not in this work to make money. The organization is not trying to make money off of interest rates or anything like that. So you can be sure that if you're doing business or engaging with Project Equity, that you are getting the most business owner friendly terms possible because we're a nonprofit and because we're not driven by profit. The next piece, setting up the ownership structure. Obviously, as you're transitioning into an employee-owned entity, whether that be a cooperative or an ESOP, that has implications on bylaws and governance and who has what vote and what amount of voting power, and are there boards of directors in place, and who votes in different board members, and so on and so forth. All of that is worked out and essentially negotiated along with the employees and the owner during that prepare portion of the process. And then lastly, there's employee education. So employee education in many cases just addresses everything from the basic questions of what does this mean for me as an employee? You know, I'm used to clocking in, clocking out, collecting my check. Does this mean that I have an added workload, or does this mean I have added responsibilities? Those are all, valid questions that our client services team answers during the transition process to make sure everybody's aware of all the implications of going from an employee to an employee owner. There's also a cultural element. Employee ownership is not just meant to be something on paper where you just are able to say, oh, I'm an owner or I'm an employee owner, but there's also a cultural difference. You having a voice in the organization, you having influence over the major decisions that the business makes. that requires sometimes a change in mindset. And so we play a role in having those conversations and making sure that all the education necessary on all those different fronts is in place. And so the third section, the actual transaction getting closed, involves executing the sales agreement. So this means the financing has been pulled together and we're actually able to pay out in part or in full the selling owner so that they get that market rate exit return that they're looking for. Closing the financing also related to that as well. Finalizing the bylaws and governance, as I mentioned, making sure that now that we've reviewed all the prospective bylaws and such with the employees, we're now putting them to paper and creating an entirely new entity around those bylaws and around that governance. And then finally, kind of the celebratory first board meeting as an employee-owned entity is something that we're highly involved with as well. And so these three phases from initial engagement all the way to the closing of the transaction typically take anywhere between 6 to 18 months. I would definitely say it leans more toward the 18-month side of things, particularly now. So this is not something that happens overnight. This is not something that any business owner would have to be worried that this is moving too fast or I'm losing control of the situation. It is very much an owner-led process. And it also, you know, the 6 to 18-month window is also important to highlight because it's important to note that you can start this process now. You know, you don't have to wait until you're, 2 or 3 months or a couple of months removed from ready to make an exit. You know, obviously this can take a year or more to actually close. So the sooner that you get into the process, the sooner that you get into the queue with us, the sooner that you set up a consult call, the better. Next slide, please. So again, rehashing the ideal employee ownership candidates and kind of simplifying it into 3 boxes, if you will, as you all, again, are engaging with various businesses through your work, whether you're at VSEDC, I saw some folks from you all represented, whether you're at Rise Financial, whether you're a marketer or a CPA, as you're interacting with various business owners or as you yourself are a business owner and you want to know just on a basic level, what would make me a good fit for employee ownership? The first is that you be profitable. Obviously, because these transactions are financed via debt, there needs to be profit that is available to service that debt. And preferably if your business has been in good financial health for the past 5 years. We often talk to business owners that have had maybe 1, maybe even 2 down years over the last 5. But overall, if they have a strong business, we're more than happy to have that conversation. Secondly, having experienced employees. Typically, our lower threshold is around 10 employees for co-ops. And then when you get into ESOPs, the minimum would be closer to 30. But obviously, there needs to be a pretty solid employee base and available for an employee ownership transaction to take place. For businesses that maybe just have 2 owners or 3 owners, 2 or 3 employees, it's not necessarily the best fit. Can it be done? Absolutely. Do we still want to talk to you? Absolutely. We do have a pretty broad network of partners that even if you all are not necessarily a fit for us, we may be able to connect you to the appropriate folks. But specifically as it relates to us, 10 and 30 typically are the minimum employee count thresholds. And then thirdly, a proven track record, established businesses with years of experience. Obviously, it's great if you have a business that's been thriving, through all the good times. But as we know, whenever these hard times hit, there's some businesses that learn, unfortunately, that their business model or that their product is only something that thrives during up cycles and not necessarily down cycles. So we're ideally looking for businesses that thrive or at least able to make it through and push through up cycles as well as down cycles. So that being said, those are kind of the 3 primary criteria that we base our initial fit assessment, if you will, on those 3 pieces. Next slide, please. So how can project equity be of service? Again, I know we went through a lot of information, and just a reminder, if there were any questions that popped up, please throw them into the chat. we're happy to address those. Again, my information is on this slide. I'm the primary point of contact for this locale in this region. So I'm more than happy to connect with you all afterward. Shoot me an email. And that being said, we do have a decent amount of time for Q&A. So if there are any questions in queue, if one of my colleagues can just let me know, and I'll try to answer those questions to the best of my ability.
Shawn, I think we're still waiting for some questions to come in, but and if people, I do see some people raising their hand. Are you okay with people saying the questions out loud too? Bridget, I'm going to go ahead and enable your mic if you'd like to say your question.
Okay, can you hear me? Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, good. Hey, Shawn, thank you. That was a great presentation. I just had a couple of questions. So this is not going to work for nonprofits because the structure has to be either an S corp or a corp, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So you indicated the over $5 million in revenue, and also having cash flow. So what if there's existing retirement plans? As an S corp or say, there's already an existing retirement plan because in place. How do you work that in with an ESOP? And then what's the vesting period from the time that say you come in and you convert a company? What's the vesting period aside from when an employee can join, but what's the vesting period for the company to even have enough cash flow with the lending part that you offer, for it to go into effect?
Ooh, that is a loaded one, Bridget, but I'm definitely going to try to answer that couple different pieces to the best of my ability. So to first address what you said in the beginning, yes, this is something that is exclusively for profit entities. Nonprofits obviously are essentially community owned. They're owned, if you will, by their board of directors. So this does not work for them. For profit entities, as far as vesting goes, what I'll tell you is this: as it relates to co-ops, the structure is highly customizable. So what that means is a lot of that can be figured out and solidified during the actual feasibility process. We have a phrase that a lot of us at Project Equity say, which is, if you've seen one small business, you've seen one small business. And essentially that means is that no two businesses are alike, no two transitions are alike. And so there's some businesses out there that may have a certain vesting structure. There's others that may have a completely different one. That's all typically negotiated and figured out during the feasibility process. And you also asked, how does it interact with existing retirement plans? Cooperatives can, and how they work with profit sharing and things like that, can be layered in collaboration with existing 401k plans and things like that. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive where it has to be one or the other. There can be both. As it relates to ESOPs, I believe that is also true, where there can be a 401k as well as that employee stock ownership plan. There's a lot of red tape and regulation that needs to be done to make that happen, but it is possible. And then lastly, to your question about the vesting as it relates to ESOPs, again, don't quote me on this, but from how I understand it, the shares technically are vested as the debt is paid off. So the ESOP, it gets a loan to acquire a certain number of shares, and as it pays that loan off, the equivalent value of what's been paid off, those shares are then vested within the ESOP. Is it vested within the individual accounts of the employees? I don't know. I'm not sure, but that's definitely something I'd be happy to get you more information on. So hopefully I was able to address at least part of your question.
Great, thanks, Shawn. And we do have a question about your outreach specifically in CD9. And question asked, have you identified businesses that fit your criteria? And if so, how have you begun your outreach process and what that might look like?
So this is, a key portion of our outreach process. We've been in communication with Mike and Councilman Price's office for some time. That, in fact, we actually intended on kicking this off closer to the top of the year, but as you all know, COVID threw a curveball at everyone, and so things were delayed a bit. But this is our outreach process. This is our initial conversation with the business community to get employee ownership on their radar. And if you are aware of businesses that fit that criteria, please let us know. Please send them our way. Please engage with me and ask me, if you have additional questions for figuring that out. But in short, this is our outreach process. So once again, if anybody else has any questions, comments, please feel free to throw a question into the chat or raise your hand via the dashboard, and I'm happy to address any other questions.
You see one participant mentioning that they lost sound. Is anyone else? Just want to make sure that our answers are being heard. Okay, it's back. Great.
Okay. Hopefully it wasn't gone too long. I see a question related to a gym. My goal is open. So somebody asked, Saul Maldonado asked if we provide support for opening a private gym or a nonprofit gym. Is this something we can assist with? No, that's not something that really falls within our purview. But again, my contact information was provided. Please, feel free to reach out to me. And if there's some people that we know in our network that maybe can be helpful, happy to, direct you their way. But helping to start from the very beginning of business is not really something that we do. We work with established legacy businesses, usually businesses that have already been around for the last 20 plus years.
And a big part of that is because the needs of a startup would just be different. So we would want to connect you with someone that specializes more in that area.
Exactly. So that said, I'll do one final call for questions or raised hands. And I see a hand went up.
Adrian, I'm going to go ahead and enable your mic if you'd like to speak. 1 second. Go ahead, Adrian.
Hello, Adrian. Can you hear us? I think I see that your mic came on. Adrian, are you there? Are you hearing anything, Jason?
I am not.
Okay. Well, Adrian, if you have a question or comment, again, shoot me an email and maybe I can be helpful via email.
Yeah, we did have a few others come in. For one, Saul, Mike Castillo from CD9. Oh, is that Adrian? Is that you?
Yeah, it's me. I think something happened with my mic. Okay. Yeah, my name is Adrian Valise. I'm a local consultant. I have a few questions. I know that for especially in legacy areas like South LA, Watts, certain areas, Wilmington, San Pedro, a lot of areas that have legacy businesses that have been around a long time that are trying to prepare for secession. They don't know what to do. Sometimes their kids aren't willing to take up that old business, but it's still profitable. I'm wondering, I joined the call late, so I didn't see if you had any slides or anything. I would, even though businesses have been around sometimes 20, 30 years, sometimes the sophistication and willingness to even engage in the discussion about going a co-op model or a co-owned model, employee-owned model, is really difficult to kind of crack into. So I'm wondering if you have anything like, like a book or a pamphlet that we might be able to break the ice with some of our clients to just engage in the conversation before, because for a lot of our clients, they've built trust over years, and to hand them off straight to you guys, it might be difficult. But if we have some type of transition plan or steps that we can take to get them to say, okay, now make an appointment with these guys, might be a good strategy. But I'm just trying to figure out if you have, I'm sure you have some type of pamphlets that are like, you know, co-ops and employee-owned businesses for purists or something. I don't know. You know, I don't want to say dummies because they're not dummies. They're actually very intuitive, intelligent business owners that just haven't been able to define or really define the intellect and business knowledge that they have, right? So it's our job to kind of translate that to current times, but it's really difficult to engage them in this conversation without a tool. So I'm just wondering what type of tools you have developed over the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Adrian. And the good thing is that we have a wealth of information and tools. We even have some presentations custom designed specifically for the situation you're describing, where we're essentially engaging a business through an existing trusted advisor. And I'd even ask, you know, it's not uncommon at all that when we do our consults, that a business owner has one of those advisors on the call as well. So they may have a CPA, sometimes even just a family friend who's kind of on there to help vet through some of the information, help give a different perspective, what have you. So definitely hear your point about, you know, it's sometimes being hard to get that initial conversation going, but we have plenty of information, happy to share some of that with you. And in the event that there are some businesses that come to mind that you feel like would be more comfortable doing a consult call where you're included on it as well, that's something that we're absolutely open to.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Shawn, we have a couple more questions that came in. Could you speak to the typical loan process, and specifically, you know, how are the loan amounts set, and what is the largest amount that a loan can entail, particularly for an ESOP transaction, which could be a little larger?
Great question. Great question. So I referenced this very briefly before, but the primary tool, if you will, that we use to figure out loan amounts would be our debt capacity analysis that happens during that initial feasibility process. And that debt capacity analysis is obviously taking in information based on the profitability of the business, so on and so forth. And whatever size of debt can be serviced in a healthy way by the business, that's where we want to land. We know that there are some cases where, you know, a business owner may want the price point to be a bit higher. We do also have, you know, some people on our client services team who are experts with earnouts and things like that. They can add some flexibility to how debt is structured. But our debt capacity analysis is our primary tool for figuring out what amount of debt is appropriate. To your second point about kind of, is there a max amount? I wouldn't say there's necessarily a max amount, because we work with other co-investors and CDFIs as well. Our capacity to put together transactions goes pretty high, especially when you're talking about ESOPs. Those are transactions that can be very big. So yeah, I wouldn't say we necessarily have a cap, but once again, to reiterate, the debt capacity analysis is the primary tool we use. We also have independent valuation people come in and they contribute information. Sometimes businesses have already had valuations done. Whatever information we can gather, and then kind of using the debt capacity analysis as the foundation to build that case, if you will. That's typically what we do.
Thanks, Shawn. And we had another question come in around how project equity is compensated, and how do we support our work and support of businesses? Do we charge fees? And if so, what's that fee structure look like?
Yeah, so thankfully, you know, because we're a nonprofit, the majority of our work is funded by foundations, so philanthropic capital, grants, donations, so on and so forth. But we do have a small portion of our work that we do charge for. That typically is the feasibility process. Typically, as it relates to a co-op, the standard fee would be $5,000. Depending on where your business is, there are subsidies available. For instance, LA County right now is a region that we're very active in. We have a relationship with LA County officials. We have a relationship with Councilman Price's office, excuse me. So because of that, the likelihood of us being able to offer subsidies to businesses in this region is much, much higher, if not almost guaranteed. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure there may be some subsidies available, or will be some subsidies available if your business is in CD9 or LA County. So yes, we do charge for the feasibility, $5,000 for a co-op. It can be a bit higher for ESOPs that are much larger, just because of the amount of legal expertise that needs to be brought in. But again, these subsidies are available to businesses in this region to cover a portion, if not all of that cost.
Thanks, Shawn. And to clarify, there also would be a fee if a business is ready to.
Jason, I want to put a finer point on Shawn's comments. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending. My name's Evan Edwards, and I am a director of business engagement and strategy at Project Equity. Shawn is on my team, and I just want to add a little finer point to his response to that question. Typically, we would ask that a company provide a subsidy application, and we review that application, take a look at the business's financials, and based on that, we can render a subsidy that is specific to certain regions within LA County for which we have partnerships or philanthropic support that's underwriting those subsidies. With respect to the question about our fees, in addition to charging for our feasibility assessment, which as Shawn stated is $5,000 for a co-op, for an ESOP, there is a range that runs anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000, and there is some variance. Other professional service providers that we pull into those consultations, and they're billed on an hourly basis. Then with respect to actually transitioning to employee ownership, Project Equity function as the project manager of that process, working with lawyers, CPAs, and other professional service providers that support the transition. Our cost is on a sliding scale that ranges from anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 based on a company's EBITDA. And then there's additional costs for lawyers and accountants that can run anywhere from $12,000 to $16,000, $18,000 is typically our experience. So at the top end, a transition to co-op can generally cost around $60,000. There are advantages to these sorts of transitions from a tax perspective, in that there's certain IRS relief and deductions available for transitioning your company to employee ownership. I also might add that in addition to deduction that the business might be able to take with respect to the transition, there is the opportunity for a business owner to receive tax relief on capital gains under Section 1042 of IRS code that provides for the potential of a 15-year tax holiday on capital gains, depending on how the proceeds of the sale are reinvested. And that could actually extend into perpetuity. Some of it depends on owner's personal finance, age, etc. So yes, just wanted to provide a little bit of detail to that. Thank you again for your questions.
Great, and Evan, we have one that might be somewhat related. I don't know if you'd like to take a first pass at it, but in regards to distribution of funds from an ESOP, does the loan have to be fully paid back before the employees are able to benefit from any distributions? And what is the typical length of a loan terms?
Yeah, so the loan terms are typically anywhere from 5 to 7 years. It's a preference to try to keep the loan terms relatively short. And again, that depends on the capacity of the business. So I'm sorry, and what was the second half of the question?
Is it true that that ESOP distributions cannot start until the loan is fully paid back?
Yes, that is true.
So Shawn, we do have a couple questions around the follow-up consultation and the consultation process. One of those being, is there any prerequisites people need to have before contacting Project Equity in regards to a consultation?
Technically, no. I would just recommend that, if this is something that you'd like to kind of get going as quickly as possible, having, maybe easy access to the financials of the business, some of the business's history, breakdowns of employee roles and things like that, which obviously, if you're an owner, are probably things you know off the top of your head. So technically, no prerequisite in order to sign up or schedule a consult. But the more information about your business you have on hand during that consult, the more we can go back and forth and learn if employee ownership is a fit, and number two, if it is a fit, what the best path forward would be.
That being said, we know that part of the challenge is just knowing the questions that need to be navigated. So by no means, feel free to contact us and we can help navigate you through those questions to get everything that you need. Also, a question came in around the type of employee ownership. Do you need to necessarily know what type of employee ownership you're going to pursue before contacting Project Equity?
Great question. Great question. No, that's what the consultation call is there to help figure out. As we gather information about your business, your situation, your scenario, it'll help best inform what type of employee ownership is the best fit. And then even if it's not 100% clear after one or multiple consult calls, there are situations where we've had where an owner is interested in multiple forms of employee ownership. And so we actually engage in that initial feasibility. And over the course of doing that more in-depth analysis, we're able to provide a recommendation on the back end on what specific form of employee ownership is the best fit and how to go about executing.
And Shawn, you went through some timelines around the transition process and the feasibility process, but we had a question around how soon should people get in touch, especially if they are starting to think about potential retirement or just an exit from their business.
Great question. As soon as possible. It doesn't hurt. The consults are free. These are free consultations. And, as I said, there's no prerequisites to signing up or requesting one. So there's no harm at all in getting the conversation going as soon as possible. We'd much rather you find out over the course of a consultation, like, oh my goodness, this is something I should have been having a conversation about for a while now, rather than you waiting and then doing the consult and finding out maybe there's some factors that would have been best known beforehand. So all that to say, as soon as possible, as soon as possible, set up a consult and we'll figure things out.
Great. Adrian, I'm going to go ahead and enable your mic again if you'd like to speak.
Oh, okay. I typed it into the question box. It's all good. So do you have any local businesses or success stories, clients that you have here in LA that would be willing to do testimonials or like share their experience with some of our clients to get them to even consider the idea? I'm just trying to think of strategies for my client.
Yeah, great question. So go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, let me take this one, Shawn. So Adrian, we currently have a couple of businesses that are in our transition program. We expect that they'll emerge from the quiet period sometime after the first of the year, in which we can share those first local success stories with respect to transition that we've completed. There are a number of employee-owned businesses in the Los Angeles region already, many of them ESOPs. And in fact, Delta Pipeline, one of the examples that Shawn shared in his presentation, is one of our partners in advocating for this work. So we're happy to share those examples with you in the nearer term. And then as our first clients in the region begin to close their transactions after the first of the year and are willing to go public with the transitions, we can also add those to any sort of reference or other referral that you would like to have.
Perfect. Thank you.
Right. We are at time, and you know, we certainly welcome any further questions that you might have. I'll make one final call if there's anyone that wants to say any last questions. Otherwise, you know, please feel free to contact Shawn. You know, we certainly welcome, and we look forward to being in touch.
I'll add one last thanks and shout out to Mike Castillo and Councilman Price's office for co-hosting this and helping make it possible. And we look forward to continued conversations and maybe even some follow-up webinars down the line.
Great. Thank you.